Later this morning, jurors in the Derek Chauvin murder trial will hear more testimony about the day George Floyd was killed in the deadly encounter with police. In this exchange, a key investigator struggled to make sense of what Floyd said as Chauvin kneeled on him.
And I'm going to ask you, sir, to listen to Mr. Floyd's voice. Did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
Did it appear that Mr. Floyd said, "I ate too many drugs"?
Yes, it did.
I ate too many drugs. Please, I can't breathe.
Having heard it in context, are you able to tell what Mr. Floyd is saying there?
Yes, I believe Mr. Floyd was saying, "I ain't do no drugs."
So it's a little different than what you were asked about when you only saw a portion of the video, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, joining us now, CNN law enforcement analyst Charles Ramsey. He's the former Washington, D.C. police chief and Philadelphia police commissioner. Also with us, Ayesha Bell Hardaway. She's an assistant professor of law at Case Western Reserve University and the co-director of the university's Social Justice Institute. Professor, just so kind of explain to people what they just saw there. They saw a defense attorney first with that witness have the witness say he heard George Floyd say effectively, "I ate too many drugs," which is a strange thing to say. You don't hear that often. Then you had the prosecution on redirect and playing him more of the tape say, no, what I heard is I ain't do no drugs. So what's the significance of the back and forth there? And who do you think got the better of it?
Yeah, no, good morning. Thank you for having me. Really good question. You know, on the whole, I think it's very difficult to make out what Mr. Floyd said. Agent Ryerson unfortunately fell prey to a tried and true cross-examination technique, lulled into agreeing to everything basically that Nelson was saying. But with so much talk about the totality of the circumstances, I think it was a sly move for the defense to play only that small portion. The defense's interpretation doesn't really make a lot of sense when you listen to the full portion that was later played by the prosecution. But unfortunately, the prosecutor was caught flat-footed initially. And with that being said, it'll be interesting to see what the jury takes away. Again, I don't think the defense attorney's interpretation makes sense under the circumstances.
You know, Commissioner, this all plays into, right? Part of what we know is a portion of the defense's strategy that it was the drugs that were really that killed George Floyd or were a significant factor, not use of force. But the bottom line is, we know in Minnesota, we have to talk about a substantial cause. You don't have to have a sole cause, Commissioner. So when we look at the case that's being laid out here, what are you taking away from this real focus on that moment and whatever Mr. Floyd may have said in terms of how it impacted the actions that were taken and the force that was used?
Well, first of all, I still don't understand exactly what it is he said personally, and I've listened to it a few times. Let me just say this. Later on, we'll hear testimony from a medical examiner. I've attended numerous autopsies in my time. They do examine the contents of the stomach during the autopsy, so we'll get an indication from that. But let's just go with this for a while with the defense counsel saying that his words were, "I ate too many drugs." As a police officer, if you see someone ingest drugs, swallow, they do that to avoid being arrested, or they tell you that they ingested a large quantity of drugs, you have an obligation to get them to the hospital to get their stomach pumped, because that could be lethal. And so if Chauvin knew that, if the other officers heard that and knew that, then again, they had another obligation here in terms of duty of care, get that person to the hospital to get their stomach pumped, because that again could kill them. And so, you know, he's trying to solve one problem, but he could be creating another problem for himself in the process.
Professor Chief Ramsey talked about the fact we are going to hear, I don't know if it's today, I don't know if it'll be tomorrow, from the medical examiner. And it feels as if a lot of what's happened these last few days has been a run-up to that moment in the testimony there. How do you expect the prosecution to go at this? Because they know going in that the defense on cross will try to score some points.
For
Well,
sure.
again,
Obviously.
Go ahead, Ayesha. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry. No. Please, Chuck, you go.
Well, I thought it was for me, so go ahead.
Professor.
No, I just wanted to say, I think the medical examiner obviously has their report and has identified what they believe the cause of death to have been. It's around the actions of police enforcement that induced a that induced a heart attack. And so with all of the information that we've heard yesterday from the chemist and the forensic scientists around the quantity of the amount of fentanyl and methamphetamines and the pills that were found, I think that will play nicely into what the medical examiner and other medical experts for the state will have to say. Obviously, as you mentioned, the defense will do everything they can to undercut that.
Commissioner?
Well, I was going to say, and this is going to revolve around that. Obviously, the most critical testimony is going to be that of the medical examiner. Again, a substantial cause of death. He did have drugs in his system, apparently. The question is whether or not that would have been a lethal dose, and would that have killed him at approximately the same time that he expired when Chauvin had him in his custody. That's going to be maybe not so easy to determine. But the other part I think that's important is that, people develop tolerance over time, drug users, opioid users. What might be lethal for you would not be lethal for me if I'm a regular drug user. So we have to keep everything in context in terms of how much was in his system and would that have in fact killed him. And that's just very, very important to remember. The other thing, even that photograph they showed a couple days ago, when they showed what could be a lethal dose of fentanyl. Again, drug dealers don't sell pure fentanyl. They step on it. They mix it with other types of like milk sugar or something else. That's how they make their profit. They take a small amount, turn it into a big amount, and they sell it. So you're not taking a pure form of the drug. If you are, that's called a hot shot, and that's intentional. They're trying to kill you. And that happens too on occasion. But the normal course of business, that's not what takes place.
Commissioner, Professor, thank you both so much for being with us this morning and being so polite. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.